I have a story to share with you. It is a story of our relationship with the urban form in our cities. I was born in a country in which uniform buildings were built all across 22 million square kilometers. This country was called the Soviet Union. My father, who is a brilliant scientist, in the late 80s, early 90s, started working with Italy and traveling to Como Lake. And so he would bring pictures like this. And, you know, as a child looking at them, it seemed to me that living in such a place is just unreal. It's like a fairy tale. It happened that then, a few years later, we moved to France for my father's work, and I studied in Toulouse, and then, you know, I had the chance to study in Paris as well, and learn Italian in Rome. And after that, I think till now, I visited around 300 cities and worked with about 50 of them for different international institutions. And I realized one critical and actually frightening thing. Only heritage cities have this character and uplift and inspire us by the way they built. What about the cities of today? Why not the cities we build now? Is this how we want our cities to look like? You know, in the world, we are 4.2 billion people living in cities. And by 2050, we are going to be 6.7 billion people. So don't we, 4.2 plus billion people, have the right to live in an inspiring environment? Or rather than this environment? Or maybe this? How can we possibly connect to these buildings? You know, I used to live in that place called St. Louis Island, which is just behind the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And you know, when you go there at night and human steps have faded away, and you just hear these walls telling you ancient stories, and you know, the hand-carved riverbank, which also has centuries, and the gargoyles and statues on the top of Notre Dame that look, you know, through the horizon. And you get such an attachment to the place that even today, whenever I visit Paris, I visit them like my friends. They are part of me now. You know, today we take it for granted that cities become more and more uniform and look alike, and we think this is the only way to go, and we think this is because we have globalization and because there is population pressure and because we don't have time to build otherwise. And this is precisely this belief I would like to question today with you. We need the uniqueness of the urban form. We need it as much as we need shelter, water, basic services, and we need it because uniqueness determines our internal well-being. You know, when we take care of our physical needs, we take care of our body. But when we take care about our immaterial needs, we actually take care of our inner selves, and we let our inner selves flourish. So today, when we walk in a city, we actually don't walk in a city, we walk through the city, we walk to a destination. We don't dwell into the place. And why so? And this is precisely most often because the way our cities are built, they are not designed for us to connect with them. So let me show you that by actually not creating a connecting, unique environment, we are not meeting any of the needs at all in today's context. And I'll demonstrate it by focusing on three major points, which are climate resilience, economic competitiveness, and in addition to this, physical and mental well-being. So I want you to meet this man, Ferapol Hermat. Ferapol Hermat is a Bangkok citizen, and until a few months back, he lived in a community called Mahakam Fort community, which dates back to 1800. So for generations, people used to live in wooden houses and cherish them. So the government has decided to evict these people. And how do you think they reacted? Did they let it happen? No. What they did, they fought for 24 long years against this eviction. Would we do this, you know, if we lived in some kind of high-rise, you know, badly maintained, and we were offered a better apartment somewhere? I don't think we would fight for that. The reason why they fought for their community is because they had a unique public realm that they didn't want to let go. And even, in fact, even after they were evicted a few months back, they created an online community to just keep these memories alive. So much their attachment was strong. Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings, and afterwards, our buildings shape us. This is exactly true. The environment we live in shapes us internally. And consequences on building uniform are much bigger than what we think. First of all, building uniform compromises climate resilience. Let's look at the Asian context for a moment. Asia is the most vulnerable continent to climate change. 6 out of 10 most climate change affected nations are located on the continent. 7 out of 25 cities most exposed to sea level rise are located in the Philippines alone. And 410 million Asian urban dwellers are at risk of coastal floods by 2025, just in a few years from now. So why is this happening? The reason why this is happening is because precisely we don't take care of uniqueness. What does uniqueness mean? Uniqueness, first of all, means dwell in the local context. Build in line with the local context. This is how you build in line with the local context. You take care of natural ecosystems, of resources that you have. Is this how we build in Asia? Let's look at Jakarta. Jakarta is a city of about 11 million people. The city is covered by 97% by concrete and asphalt. What does this mean? This is a city where monsoon would happen every year, as in any country of Southeast Asia. Where does the water go? The way we built it, we really compromise people's safety in these places. Let's look at India now. 21 Indian major cities, and when I say major, I mean Delhi, I mean Hyderabad, I mean Chennai, are going to run out of groundwater by 2020. So we are not talking about, some remote future, maybe in 50 years. It is tomorrow. It is in 1.5 years. We are running into these catastrophes today, and we are running at them precisely because of the way we build these cities. Bangalore and Chennai have lost 80 and 90% of their water bodies, respectively, over the last 40 years. At the moment, they both face severe floods and water shortages. Another important point, faceless uniform cities are becoming uncompetitive. Okay, Singapore in 2016 has received 16.4 million tourists versus India in the same year, 14.5. So we are basically talking about a small nation of 5.7 million people versus the second most populated nation of 1.3 billion people. What is the reason? So Singapore, since the 80s, has placed the concept of identity at the core of its urban development. Any development plan has to first consider how it will enhance the identity of Singapore. It is extremely strict, and it's given its fruits. Another point regarding competitiveness. When urbanization started, that was the time of industrial revolution. So people would move to cities because there were jobs in factories. And obviously, if you want to work in a factory, you'd rather live nearby. Is this the case today? Today is the era of digital revolution. And over 50% of global jobs are in services. What does this mean? I can work from anywhere. Do I need to live in some ugly concrete city? I don't. So it means that if a city wants to attract qualified individuals, it actually needs to offer quality of life. And third important point, building uniform severely affects our physical and mental health. As per the WHO, 23% of deaths in 2012 were due to physical environment. All these nice things we see when we go out of this auditorium, which are air pollution, heavy traffic, noise pollution, badly built houses, all this affects us tremendously. What about our mental health? The psychologist Colin Ehlert conducted a very interesting psychological experiment. What he did, he put sensors on people, and then he asked them to walk along a uniform, kind of boring building. And then he asked to do them the same, walking in front of a historical or decorated or interesting building. So what he noticed in this experience is that when people were walking near a boring building, their stress level dramatically went up, which was measured by cortisol. It does affect us. It is a reality. And finally, the argument of social justice. We often talk about affordable housing now. And we all agree that, yes, every human being has a right to shelter and to housing, no matter what their income is. But we don't seem to acknowledge that everyone, independently from their income, also needs a certain well-being, a certain inspiration, that people have psychological needs as well, not only physical needs. So look at this at your right. Look at this resettlement affordable housing colony. versus the nice, posh areas of South Delhi. Why don't we offer these people at least a little bit of greenery, of public spaces, a little bit of variety in buildings? We don't think they deserve it or what? So we have these three major challenges, but we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us. You know why? Because 60% of the infrastructure we are going to see in 2030 is yet to be built. This means these 10 years are critical years which are going to determine how our cities are going to look like for decades. So how can we solve some of these issues with bringing in more uniqueness? There are three ways of doing that. First, you need to build in line with the local context. Look at the city of Siem Reap and at the city of Manila. Siem Reap has adapted to the local context. You know that there is going to be monsoon, there are going to be heavy precipitations, so they build houses on stilts and they put a small boat nearby, so they are not affected by heavy rains. Now look at Manila, and these standardized houses you could find anywhere across the world, and they're suffering because they haven't taken enough the context into consideration. So fine, we may say these are, this is small scale, but in Asian cities we have such a high population load. How do we deal with that? Well, believe me, most populated Asian cities, actually a number of them, deal with these issues dramatically well. Hong Kong has about 70% of its territory covered by greenery. This is an example of Tokyo, where they intentionally keep green spaces and not so much of high-rise because they're earthquake prone. Many other examples. And actually, you know what? 60% of Asian urban dwellers live in small to medium-sized cities. Do we really need these concrete high-rises? This is a scope to create, to go small scale, to do interesting things. For example, let's get inspired a little bit from our heritage. If you go to Shimla, this is a cold climate and it's in winters, and it's also an earthquake-prone zone. So how did people build? You have the ground floor, which is very solid. Thick walls to keep the temperature inside, and also to resist to potential earthquake. And then the first floor is very light. So in case the earthquake is strong, it's going to produce less possible damages. And the sloping roof in case it snows. Building unique is building in organized complexity. So here, often we tend to fall into one of the two extremes when we want to improve our cities. Either we say we should regulate everything, everything should be written, and everything should be controlled, or we just leave the things to develop the way they're going, and leave the market forces and whoever do whatever they want. We need the middle ground instead. This is a picture of the neighborhood of Orchard Street in Singapore. Singapore provides very clear guidelines to each neighborhood on what is the identity of the neighborhood and how to preserve it. In case of Orchard Street, this is a vibrant commercial and tourism area. So the guidelines say that your building should be in line with other buildings, should look good in comparison. Your roofscape should be in line with the streetscape, so you can't build just any roof, it needs to be aesthetic. You need to provide large pedestrian areas and semi-covered public areas. So it is an interactive facade, not a closed facade. And very importantly, it says, if you believe your project is unique, but it doesn't comply with our guidelines, please share it with us, we'll look at it. So there are basic guidelines which are strictly enforced, and then you have freedom to create. This is what creates uniqueness. Let us disconnect from this intellectual talk for a minute, and let us project ourselves, forgetting what we see outside maybe, in how would it be if all cities were unique? And what about if every city you visit for any purpose, the city you live in, the city you go to see relatives, the city you go to for work, everything has this unique element? Wouldn't it be just a thrilling experience of life? Wouldn't it be like to be on holidays for 365 days a year? And then there is experience of beauty. Beauty is one of the strongest experiences that we can have in life. And no wonder that major artists, created in Paris, created in Rome, created in Kyoto, created in Hoi An, those cities that provide us this inspiration, that uplift us, that open our opportunities. So can we do anything about the way we are going now? Should we wait for governments to do something at some point in time? Or can we today take maybe some small actions? So there are a few I'd like to share with you. So first of all, what we need to do, we need to acknowledge that the emotional connect with the urban built environment is important. Christopher Alexander is one of the most renowned architects and design theorists who actually stated for decades that the right to beauty and uniqueness in cities is our birthright. He has many followers all across the world. You know, and then small practical actions. Many of us have a balcony, right? So what about just putting a few plants, a small lantern, so that when people walk on the street, they see something different. If a few people do it in the street is going to be transformed altogether. And then if you're an owner of a house, you know, you can repaint your house. If you're building a house, you can discuss with the architect on how can you adapt your building to the local context to the best. And then a few small neighborhood level actions. Now, greening. So greening can never go wrong. I mean, how can a tree be ugly, you know? So this is a city where I was born called Akademgorodok, which is a typical Soviet city of the 50s. If you look at the buildings, they're just concrete boxes. But then, look, with a bit of painting and with this wonderful green surrounding, it actually looks pretty amazing. It has recently become regionally protected cultural natural heritage to that extent. Yeah, and then, you know, you can create on facades. For example, volunteers from Vananba NGO in Madurai, they just decided to clean and repaint walls of a kind of neglected neighborhood. And not only they did that, but it had actually a tremendous spillover effect because the Commission of Madurai has noticed that and he has taken these actions in many other neighborhoods. Creative pavements. So, you know, pavement we don't pay attention much to, but very often I see historical cities spoiled because you have pretty interesting, you know, old buildings, and then you just spill over cement, and it completely kills the character. On the opposite, maybe the buildings are not so fancy, but just put a little bit of variety. Why do we always want to just put cement? And it's going to uplift the city. And then finally, motivate people. The Indian Railways recently created a beautification contest for cities to beautify train stations. And so much creativity came out of it. So we just need to acknowledge that, yes, we do have this need to live in an inspiring, beautiful, and unique surrounding, and voice it out. I also have many ideas for policymakers, businesses, urban practitioners on how we can put it in place. I'll be happy to share it in my next TED Talk. Thank you.